Iceland, a country of brutal, rugged beauty, dominated by inhospitable highlands, powerful volcanoes, vast glaciers, and frigid winters. It may not seem like the place for a holiday, but as I've been very glad to discover, Iceland is one of the best holiday destinations in Europe today, offering a chance to experience nature up close like nowhere else. So in this video, join me as we admire towering waterfalls, volcanic craters, majestic geysers, immense fjords, spectacular mountains, and otherworldly coastlines, while also delving into some of Iceland's cultural highlights as well, found everywhere from major cities to tiny settlements right in the heart of the wilderness. These are 20 amazing places to visit in the land of ice and fire. First up, there are a few natural landmarks in Iceland more majestic and more visible than the country's incredible array of waterfalls. There are as many as 10,000 waterfalls in Iceland, each more spectacular than the last, from the vast cascading torrents of Urriðafoss to the sky-high drop of the gorgeous Seljalandsfoss, both found on the south coast. Further inland, on the famous tourist route known as the Golden Circle, you'll find the immense Gullfoss, the iconic two-stage waterfall that's a must-see of any trip to the Icelandic countryside. While in the same neck of the woods, you'll find the much smaller but picture-perfect Öxarárfoss, where water tumbles into an icy pool that sits in the middle of a major rift in the landscape, roughly where the tectonic plate of Eurasia meets that of North America. But of all of Iceland's waterfalls, there are few with a wow factor, quite like the immense Skógafoss. With a drop of roughly 60 metres, this towering cascade of water is full of surprises. Most spectacular of all is the rainbow that you can often see at its foot, produced by the huge amount of spray as the flow hits the earth. Surrounding Skógafoss, located just off Iceland's famous ring road and roughly 150 kilometres from the capital Reykjavik, is yet more dazzling scenery, with snowy peaks looming over trickling waterways, and the waterfall itself home to some interesting stories. Legend has it that one of Iceland's earliest Viking settlers buried a chest filled with gold in a cave just behind this waterfall, only one item of which has been found since. The Vikings began settling in Iceland more than 1,000 years ago, voyaging across the sea from Norway, and the story goes that the very first permanent settlers made their home in the country's southwest, a place we now know as the city of Reykjavik. Iceland may be world famous for its nature, but its capital and largest city is an absolute treat to visit too. Often ranked as one of the safest and cleanest cities in the world, Reykjavik has something for everyone, from popular shopping opportunities around the famous Laugavegur street to stunning seaside views. But if you're keen on learning more about Iceland's culture and history, then there's nowhere better to go than Reykjavik. The city is home to some of the country's oldest buildings, as well as nationally significant landmarks like Alþingishúsið, the home of Iceland's parliament, which has been running for nearly 1,100 years. There's also the Prime Minister's office, and on the waterfront, the eye-catching modernist landmark known only as Harpa. Elsewhere in the city, you'll find Arnarhóll, a small hill said to be the place where the very first settlers arrived in Iceland, the mighty Norwegian house known as Höfði, which overlooks the sea, and which is best known as the venue for the 1986 summit between Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev, which went a long way to ending the Cold War. There are so many sights to see in Reykjavik, but there's one which stands, quite literally, above the rest, the mesmerising Hallgrímskirkja, the tallest church in all of Iceland. Built over 45 years and opened in the 1980s, this space-age place of worship is jaw-droppingly impressive, designed in a style that mimics rocky basalt columns, which you'll find all over Iceland's landscape. But it's just as much of a treat if you venture inside. The church home to a spacious nave, filled with history, and a great tower, which offers some of the very best views over Reykjavik in all directions. Of course, those views will leave you longing for the nature that surrounds the city, and so it's well worth venturing out on an excursion to the north of Reykjavik and the wild peninsula of Snæfellsnes. Dominated by a glacier-topped mountain, which actually featured as the portal underground in Jules Verne's Journey to the Centre of the Earth, Snæfellsnes is the epitome of Iceland's rugged natural landscape. Its most iconic landmark is without doubt the gorgeous Kirkjufell, Church Mountain, which famously featured in the Game of Thrones TV series, and which is often touted as Iceland's most photographed mountain of all. Elsewhere, the peninsula thrills with towering volcanic craters and an eerie black and white coastline, which is at its most unsettling just outside the tiny village of Arnarstapi, where the rough waves of the Atlantic Ocean batter the immense sea cliffs with vicious rage. But when it comes to coastal views that come from another world, it's on the other side of Iceland that things feel even more alien, at the world-famous black sand beach of Reynisfjara. The colour of the sand created by volcanic rock is the main appeal, but there's much more to this beach than that. Towering over the sands are huge cliffs, inside which a number of caves offer shelter, while large basalt rock columns, also very popular with tourists, soar high into the sky. The waves at Reynisfjara may seem to gently lap against the shore, but they're often the biggest danger on the beach. Incredibly, there's no land between Reynisfjara and the continent of Antarctica, meaning that waves here have thousands and thousands of kilometres of Atlantic Ocean to build, and tend to wash further and faster onto the shore than an unsuspecting tourist might expect. Out at sea, meanwhile, are the icons of the black sand beach, the sea stacks known as Reynistrangar, which legend has it are the remains of great trolls that were frozen in time, as they were pulling a ship into shore. Reynisfjara beach sits on the very southern coast of Iceland, just a stone's throw from the beautiful village of Viki Myrdal, known for its beautiful church, and which is the southernmost village in all of Iceland. But if you venture over to the country's north coast, you'll find Iceland's second city, the beautiful and often underrated Akureyri. Situated inside a major fjord, this city of just under 20,000 people is a real hidden gem, home to its own space-age church, to rival the one in Reykjavik, and a varied cityscape with a number of different neighbourhoods, the city centre, the harbourside Odeyrin, and the gorgeous Old Town, home to a colourful array of historic houses, some of which date back more than 200 years. In the Old Town, you'll also find the Akureyri Museum and the truly serene Botanical Gardens, an absolute delight to explore in the snow. Strolling along the shore of the fjord, known as Eyjafjallajökull, you'll also encounter fetching modern landmarks like the city's wooden bridge, as well as Akureyri Airport, where planes land and take off on a runway built on top of the waters of the fjord itself. Now, fjords, found all over Iceland's coast, are formed by glaciers, cutting a deep valley into the land. But in Iceland you can still witness glacial movement in action, one of the best places being at Sólheimajökull, back on the country's south coast. Currently in retreat due to warming temperatures, the majesty of Sólheimajökull can be admired from specially designated viewing platforms. But for the more adventurous, guided tours allow you to hike along the glacier itself, an experience you won't find in many other parts of the world. It's one of just under 300 named glaciers in Iceland, the name Sólheimajökull literally meaning home of the sun, and it's one of a number of place names that are tricky to pronounce if you're coming from overseas. Among the most famous of Icelandic tongue twisters is Eyjafjallajökull, a name which you might remember from about 13 years ago. This was the name of the volcano which erupted in 2010, causing havoc to European air travel. And today you can visit and admire Eyjafjallajökull up close, and maybe even curse it if your flight was cancelled all those years ago. The Icelandic language, closely related to the Old Norse tongue spoken by Viking settlers, can be tough to get your head around, but it's rich in history. And history is something which this Nordic nation has in spades. For much of history, Iceland was far from the developed nation that it is today. Until the mid-20th century, it ranked among Europe's poorest countries, and so people contended with the harsh elements all year round, often living and working in the middle of nature. The most famous example of this is found at the Thingvellir National Park, located about 50 kilometres inland from the capital Reykjavik. We mentioned earlier that Iceland's parliament, the Alþingi, claims to be the longest-running national parliament in the world, established nearly 1,100 years ago in 930 AD. But surprisingly, Parliament has only sat in Reykjavik since 1845. For the vast majority of its history, it actually met in the fields of this vast national park, Thingvellir translating as the Parliament Fields. This was once common in Viking and other northern European societies. A central rural location was chosen to allow lawmakers from all over the country to be able to attend. And today, tours to Thingvellir allow you to immerse yourself in this historic parliamentary practice, where laws were made and justice was dealt out in the middle of the wilderness. The most famous landmark being the imposing Lögberg, the Law Rock, where laws were proclaimed from the early 10th to the late 13th centuries. Thingvellir is where Iceland's history and nature come crashing together in enthralling fashion, making it one of the highlights of any trip to the land of ice and fire. But just a short distance away, and once again part of the famous Golden Circle tourist route, is probably Iceland's most exciting natural landmark, the mighty Geysir. Lending its name to the English word geyser, this spot in the heart of the wilderness is an absolute thrill. And while the historic Great Geyser may not be as active as it once was, it's surrounded by a neighbourhood of boiling hot volcanic pools and fellow erupting springs, the most active nowadays known as Strokkur, which shoots plumes of water every few minutes tens of metres into the air. It's a rare chance to get up close and personal with the geothermal activity of this volcanic island, which as we've seen commands awe and respect from Icelanders and visitors alike. Of course, there are plenty more places to visit than what we've covered in this video. The famous Blue Lagoon near Reykjavik, the charming town of Siglufjörður on the mysterious Troll Peninsula on Iceland's very north coast, and an array of experiences which you can't miss, whether that be witnessing the northern lights for yourself or watching whales swimming in the waters that surround the country. So what are you waiting for? Situated a short flight from both Europe and North America, Iceland is a place for absolutely everyone, a destination like no other that will make for the trip of a lifetime.